The first of 3 top 10 matchups on Saturday takes place at 4 o'clock Eastern time on ESPN. Number 4 Houston at number 8 Kansas. Eli, you have the rankings as Houston second in the nation, and Kansas, you agree with the AP poll. You have them at 8th. Houston would be a 4.5 point road favorite if Haslametrics was making the spread. Over under of 131.5, quite low for this season in college basketball. I have a couple of things that stand out to me in this game, Eli, but I want to start with you and just, what an awesome matchup we have here in the Big 12 and what is just a gauntlet bloodbath of a conference play season in the Big 12.
So you brought up a crazy, crazy betting market last week to me. I don't have a betting market for you here on Outside Shots that rivals that, but I have a stat or a record that kind of contends with it.
All right.
Bill Self, when Kansas is the lower ranked team in the AP Top 25 at home, which is the case with Houston and Kansas, or it's going to be this Saturday, 8-0 at home at Allen Fieldhouse, which doesn't, probably when you digest it, maybe on the surface, it's a little bit surprising, but when you digest it, okay, that's one of the best home court advantages in college basketball. And Bill Self and this Kansas team play to that and then some every time they play at home, it seems like, especially when the game has a ton of stakes on the line. So they're elite when it comes to facing some of the best competition in college basketball at Allen Fieldhouse at the Phog. But to me, this is going to come down to pace. Houston ranks number 351 in adjusted tempo. Jamal Shead has been the trigger by all means for this Cougars team at both ends of the floor. 12.3 points per game, 7th highest assist rate in the country, 17th highest steal rate in college basketball. An elite defense, number 1 in adjusted defensive efficiency. And on the flip side of that, you have a Kansas team that wants to play up tempo, wants to beat you in transition. Number 1 in the Big 12 in adjusted pace. And I mentioned Shead's offensive game, second on the team in points per game to LJ Cryer, the Baylor transfer. But per CBB analytics, Shead's 16.4 field goal attempts in this 5-game stretch for the Cougars, last 5 games, ranks in the 99th percentile nationally. So he has really upped his game or increased his shot volume in Big 12 play. Conversely, you have Kevin McCullough, one of the best well-rounded players in the country. So not like those two are going head-to-head, but really, really good matchup when it comes to the battle of pace and tempo, and then just star power also, and defense and offense. The Cougars have an elite transition defense to that point. Like I mentioned, Jayhawks want to push the floor, but the Cougars rank in the 97th percentile when it comes to their transition defense per synergy. I mentioned the Bill Self stats, so maybe they can combat that with this crowd getting into it and being able to leak out and generate some extra second chance shots and being able to push the floor maybe a little bit more than Houston would like. The other thing with Houston that I mentioned on last week's episode, they take a lot of difficult shots. 10th in the Big 12 when it comes to effective field goal percentage. So not the most consistent shooting team, whether it's in the mid-range. I know you hate mid-range shots, or from behind the arc. So I kind of see maybe a look towards the under, or maybe just a live look with the total, depending on whether Kansas is controlling the tempo or if it's Houston.
So I want to start with Houston's defense because it's historic right now. Like, this is the reason why they are considered an elite team in college basketball this year, despite this being their first year in the Big 12. Right now, if you look at their adjusted defensive efficiency over at KenPom, Eli, can you tell me the last team that had an adjusted efficiency as good as Houston's right now?
Maybe another Kevin Sampson Houston team?
No, I'll get... All right, so this is bad radio, but it's a team that you loved. It was the Texas Tech Final Four team in 2019 with Chris Beard. That's how good this Houston defense has been. It is even slightly better than the Rick Pitino Louisville team that won the national championship back in 2013, which was just a havoc pressing team with Peyton Siva and Russ Smith. So that's a good starting point.
I will say, I think I've tried to erase Chris Beard from my memory. Can I use that to my defense?
Yeah, for several good reasons, might I add. All right, so that's why Houston is never out of a game, right? That's why they're as rated as high as they are. But I also just want to mention that these two teams and the way they play offense drive me nuts. It makes no sense. I think it's dumb the way they select their shots. Let's start with Houston. They have a top 60 3-point percentage this season against the average opponent, yet their 3-point attempt rate is outside the top 100. They rank 285th in the country in mid-range shooting percentage, yet they're taking the 6th most mid-range shots in the country this year. They rank 22nd in the nation in near proximity field goal percentage. Really good, right? Except they're attempting the 281st most near proximity field goal attempts. They're running their offense stupidly. And Kansas on the other side isn't much better. Kansas ranks 33rd in the country in 3-point percentage against the average opponent. And yet their 3-point attempt rate is 336th, Eli. What are we doing here? They're 4th in near proximity field goal percentage. Makes sense, right? You got Hunter Dickinson. They're 110th in near proximity field goal or attempt rate. Like it's mind-boggling how stupid the shot selection is of both of these teams, which is why you have a projected over-under in the 130s here in one of the most historic offensive seasons we've seen in college basketball. So I can't trust either of these offenses to have like a ceiling game, to be honest with you. And I think it's a reason why I might be looking for the opportunity to pick them as an upset once we get down the road here. But at least in this particular matchup, I agree with most of what you said about Kansas maybe being able to pull an upset here. And the biggest thing for me might be just the size advantage that I think Kansas has in this game. Kansas is a top 10 team in average height, and Houston is 331st. If you look at Houston's roster, I mean, 6'1", 6'1", 6'3", 6'5", 6'2", in terms of the guys that are getting the most usage here. They don't have anybody on the roster bigger than 6'8". Like, everybody on the roster for Kansas is 6'7" or higher. And even with Kansas's like bench minutes situation, that's still an issue for me in this game, is the size advantage that Kansas has.
The one area I'll use to combat it, and granted, I don't have a stat to throw at you. By the way, I think you may need to talk to a therapist about your concerns with Kansas and Houston, because you seem a little upset, and some of it's warranted. I'll give you that. Houston, 6th ranked offensive rebounding percentage in college basketball. So the size doesn't compute with the offensive rebounding rate, but we've seen this year over year over year over year. That's why I thought it was going to be a Calvin Sampson defense, because not only does he get his teams to play above expectation at that end of the floor, they crash the glass, man. It's ridiculous. Whether it was, I tweeted this out earlier in the week, Fabian White, Chris Harris, Justin Gorham, Reggie Chaney, Josh Carlton, Juwan Roberts, Javier Francis, and now the freshman Joseph Tugler, who had some huge offensive rebounds against Texas on Monday night in that overtime win. Granted, Houston didn't cover, but those aren't 7-foot bigs. We're talking 6'7", 6'8", and man, do they generate second chance shots. So I'm sorry to say that you may be screaming at the TV a little bit more when it comes to this matchup on Saturday.
Yeah, I just don't understand why a team would be so good at the most efficient ways to play basketball and spend the majority of their time shooting the ball in the most inefficient way possible. And both of these teams are that way. And your point is well taken. Clearly, Houston has always been a really good offensive rebounding team. But I did go and look at the opponents that they faced in Big 12 play. And for the most part, it hasn't mattered, right? They're the class of the conference this year. But the games where they've at least struggled a little bit have been a couple of the teams that are in the upper third of Division I in average height, like BYU. So I am curious if they are as successful offensive rebounding in this game against Houston, who has pretty much a size advantage in every matchup in this game. It's going to be a fascinating one. I'm on that trend, I think, with Kansas. I think not so much because of the trend, but I do like the matchup here for Kansas to at least cover more than a possession. So I'll be interested in the Jayhawks there.